Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to let everyone get into the webinar before we get started. Okay, it looks like it's slowing down just a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to today's statewide webinar hosted by SpedTechs and Partners Resource Network. My name is Sarah Untersea and I'm part of the SpedTechs team. The topic for today's webinar is Special Education Updates with Kristin McGuire. A few housekeeping items before we get started today. If you need technical assistance during today's webinar, we do have Brian Wilson with us today from Region 10 to provide that support. He's the black and white box you might see on your Zoom screen, and you can send him a chat message if you need any help. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the SpedTechs website. It usually takes about a week in order for that to be posted, but we will drop our website link in the chat so you are able to access that once it becomes available. Although time does not allow for live questions and answers today, you're welcome to put any questions that you may have in the Q&A box, and we will pass those along to our presenters following the webinar. SpedTechs is the Special Education Information Center for Texas. We're a collaborative project between Region 10 Education Service Center and Texas Education Agency. We help parents understand their rights and responsibilities under IDEA and facilitate collaboration when there are concerns between the parent and the school district. We also serve as a resource for educators. We offer support via phone, email, or live chat for families and professionals, webinars, resources. Our contact information is on the screen. Now going to turn it over to Stephanie McLaughlin to share some additional information about Partners Resource Network.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin and I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And throughout Texas, there are 4 projects known as PACT, PATH, PIN, and TEAM. Our mission at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. We do this through a network of highly skilled, regionally located coordinators who are knowledgeable in local policies, services, and resources, as well as state and national guidelines. We provide training, information, and one-on-one assistance at no cost to Texas families and youth. We serve parents of children and youth with disabilities from birth to age 26, as well as youth self-advocates between the ages of 14 and 26. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. We're excited to welcome our presenter, Kristin McGuire. Kristen currently serves as the Deputy Associate Commissioner of Special Populations, Policy, Reporting, and Technical Assistance at the Texas Education Agency. Prior to her role at the agency, she served as the Director of Governmental Relations at the Texas Council of Administrators of Special Education for 5 years, and as a policy consultant and analyst at the Texas Association of School Boards for about 10 years prior to that. She launched her career in special education by becoming a special education teacher after working in various nonprofit social services companies. Kristen continued to advance as an educator to a district-level position before moving to the state education policy arena. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Kristen.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I am happy to be with you today. I'm going to get my screen ready to share here. All right. All right. Okay. We will go ahead and get started. So good afternoon. Again, my name is Kristin McGuire with TEA, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Today, I want to present some updated student level data around special education, and then I'll mention a few recent policy updates. And then we'll close out with a discussion of many of the frequently asked questions that we receive from parents and other stakeholders here at TEA. All right, so let's start with a little bit of data. The numbers here are based on counts as of the October fall data collection that school districts and open enrollment charter schools submit to TEA. So you can see from this slide that the numbers of students identified as receiving special education and related services continue to increase each year. So as of October 2023, those numbers represented about 14% of the student population in Texas. And then here's another look. When you look at the growth of the identification of students with disabilities receiving special education services compared with the overall student growth in Texas, you can see that the percentage growth is much higher for those identified as receiving special education services. The first step in identification is, of course, the special education evaluation. So you can see the number of evaluations steadily increasing as well over the last several years. And we should have 2023-24 data here in terms of evaluations very soon. People often ask specifically about the identification of dyslexia in Texas, and you can see by this chart that students identified with dyslexia who are receiving special education services is increasing significantly. And then when reviewing the actual disability categories that are identified in Texas, specific learning disability is the most frequently identified, which aligns with federal trends. And next is speech and language impairment, followed by autism. So I want to move on to some general updates that you should or that we want you to be familiar with. The 2024 update to the State Board of Education's Dyslexia Handbook is now in effect. So all local education agencies, or what we call LEAs, which include both school districts and open enrollment charter schools, must follow the handbook's requirements when screening for, evaluating, identifying, and serving students with dyslexia or related disorders. On August 9th, TEA released an FAQ to accompany the handbook, which is intended to assist with implementing the handbook's requirements. All right, so I encourage you to review this document that's linked in this next slide regarding back to school updates that TEA published and distributed to LEAs. This update document discusses multiple Commissioner of Education rules that were amended and were effective in late July. So these changes include the distribution of the TEA created form that's called the Overview of Special Education for Parents when a disability is suspected. Previously, this was only required when it was dyslexia that was the suspected disability. Additionally, there's now a requirement that parents must receive a copy of the special education evaluation report as soon as possible after the evaluation report is complete, but no later than 5 school days before the initial admission review or dismissal or ARD committee meeting is scheduled to be held. Another change to be aware of is that the Texas Education Code requires certain transition requirements to be addressed at age 14, but federal law has a couple of others that are required by age 16. So to align and clarify these requirements, our recent rule amendments move both federal and state transition requirements to age 14. We also have several rules where provisions associated with dyslexia and related disorders were added. These include our eligibility criteria rule and our individualized education program, or IEP rule. Finally, the state's beginning the transition of accepting developmental delay as an eligibility category for students. So historically, the state of Texas has not used this eligibility in the context of school-age children, but this will be mostly phased in by the 25-26 school year. So we will start using developmental disability as we move into the next, or developmental delay, excuse me, as we move into the 25-26 school year. Another thing to be aware of, TEA has changed the operational name of the Supplemental Special Education Services Grant to the Parent-Directed Special Education Services Grant to more accurately reflect the program, but the same eligibility applies. The agency has instituted an application period for the program, which will reopen on February 3rd, 2025, and then will close March 31st, 2025. If you would like more information or would like to sign up for updates, you can visit pdses.tea.texas.gov for more information. Okay, so let's move on to some frequently asked questions that we at the agency are often asked. So just a heads up, I will likely refer to school throughout these questions and responses. So unless I state otherwise, school could be interchangeable with district, district school campus, or an open enrollment charter school. All right, so first question is around initial evaluations. So if I think my child needs a special education evaluation, what do I do? So if you believe your child may have a disability and a need for special education and related services, the state law triggers a timeline for a school to respond to a written parental request when it is submitted to the district's director of special education or another district administrative employee. Typically, those requests are submitted at the school level to the principal or a particular special education contact at your child's school. Often, schools have the person to contact listed in their student handbooks. However, even if you voice this desire to your child's teacher, the teacher should take steps to discuss the request with the appropriate staff or let you know the school's procedures on making the requests. So with so many things going on in school, you'll want to just follow up on your request, especially if you make a verbal request rather than a written one. A school must still respond to a verbal request, but the law specifically refers to a required response from the school within 15 school days when it is submitted in written form. Next question, does the school have to respond to my request for a special education evaluation? The answer there is yes. So if a written request is made, like we talked about in the previous question, the school must respond no later than the 15th school day with a response as to whether it will provide an opportunity for you as a parent to consent to an evaluation or to refuse to provide the evaluation and provide you with materials about your parental rights around that decision. So the school, again, must also respond to a verbal request, but there is no legally defined time frame to do so, like there is for a written request. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. If the school agrees to conduct an evaluation, how long do they have to complete it? So first, it's important to review what you are given by the school before you consent to an evaluation. You will receive what is called the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, which is a document describing your rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. You will also receive that TEA-created form called the Overview of Special Education for Parents, which gives a description of the process of evaluation, identification, and services. You will also receive what's called prior written notice, which is something that is required whenever a school proposes an evaluation. And if your child is later identified, you'll receive this prior written notice again, as it's also required whenever the school is proposing or refusing to change any services or placement of the student. So in this initial prior written notice, it will include a description of any evaluation procedures that the school is proposing that it conduct. Then you will also be given the opportunity to consent to the evaluation. Once the school receives your consent, it generally has 45 school days to complete the evaluation. This timeline varies a bit depending on when parental consent is received during the school year, and then how many absences your child has during that evaluation timeframe. Moving on to the next question, do I get a copy of the evaluation report? And the answer is yes, a parent is entitled to a copy of the evaluation report. That new commissioner rule amendment now requires that a parent receive a copy of the evaluation report as soon as possible after its completion, but no later than 5 school days prior to the initial ARD committee meeting to determine eligibility and potential placement for special education services. There is one exception to that in law, in that within certain timeframes, sometimes the evaluation report is due to the parent by June 30th, but that's a kind of special situation. Next question is, what happens after the evaluation? How do I know if my child qualifies for special education services? So after the evaluation report is completed, the school has up to 30 calendar days to hold an ARD committee meeting to determine eligibility. This meeting will go over the evaluation report, and the committee will determine if the student qualifies as a student with a disability and whether the student has the need for special education related services because of the disability. So if determined eligible, the ARD committee will develop an IEP and offer you an opportunity to consent to the actual provision of those special education and related services to your child. There is one exception to the 30 calendar day timeframe, and that's when the 30th calendar day falls during the summer when school is not in session. In those cases, the school has until the 15th school day to have that initial ARD committee meeting. What happens if I disagree with the school's evaluation report? So as a member of the ARD committee, you as a parent can talk through your concerns and disagreement during the initial ARD committee meeting. Ultimately, if you still disagree with the school's evaluation, you have the right to obtain an independent educational evaluation, usually referred to as an IEE. If you would like an IEE, the school must give you information about its evaluation criteria and where you can get an IEE, although you aren't limited to choosing from that list. However, if you ask for the IEE to be paid at the school's expense, the evaluation and the evaluator must meet the same criteria that the LEA uses. If you ask for an IEE at the school's expense, the school district must either file a due process complaint if they feel that the evaluation it conducted is appropriate, or go ahead and provide the IEE at its expense, unless the school demonstrates through a hearing that the IEE did not meet the school's established criteria. So if you obtain an IEE at your expense, an ARD committee must consider the evaluation if it meets the same criteria as the school's. Next question is, what disabilities qualify for special education services? So there are 13 disability categories recognized by that federal law IDEA. There are disabilities such as autism, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, intellectual disability, and a general category called other health impairment. To qualify for special education services, a student must be identified both with a qualifying disability, and the student must have the need for special education and related services, commonly referred to as specially designed instruction, or SDI, to meet the unique needs of the student. So the ARD committee will determine whether a student meets both prongs for eligibility. So moving on to the membership of the ARD committee. So the next question, who's a part of the ARD committee for my child? So in the federal law, the ARD committee is referred to as an IEP team. So in Texas, we call it the ARD committee. This committee has required members, which includes the parent, but membership will vary based on the suspected or the identified disability. So an ARD committee is generally always composed of the parent, at least one general education teacher, at least one special education teacher, someone from the school who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of special education, and also knows about general education curriculum and the school's resources, and an individual who can interpret instructional implications of the evaluation results. A parent and the school can invite others who have knowledge or special expertise of the student. So next question, if my child qualifies for services and I consent to those services, what happens with the IEP that we develop? How will I know if my child is making progress? So once an IEP is developed, the school must provide copies of the IEP to the student's teachers, and the school will begin to implement the IEP. Unless the ARD committee agrees to a shorter time frame, you will receive updated progress on your child's IEP each grading period at a minimum. Almost every student who receives special education and related services is assigned some kind of case manager or tracking teacher for the student. This is typically the teacher or provider who works most closely with your child on the implementation of their IEP. If you're unsure of who this might be, you can ask your campus principal or counselor, and they should be able to find that information out for you. IEPs will be reviewed at least on an annual basis, but you can request an ARD committee meeting at any time if you feel your child's special education services might need to be adjusted. What happens, the next question is, what happens if I do not agree with all elements of my child's IEP in an ARD committee meeting? So if you do not agree with an element of your child's IEP at the meeting, please voice this to the rest of the committee so that it can be discussed. The school needs to take all reasonable actions necessary to ensure that you understand the proceedings of the ARD committee meeting. If mutual agreement is not reached, you have an opportunity to recess the meeting in order to reconvene within 10 school days, unless you agree to a longer time frame with the school. During that recess, the ARD committee members will consider alternatives, gather additional data, prepare further documentation, or obtain other people who might assist in reaching mutual agreement. If mutual agreement is still not reached, the school does have to implement the IEP that it determines to be appropriate. You as a parent have a right to include a statement of disagreement in the IEP, and you also have several dispute resolution options available to you, such as filing a state complaint, filing for a due process hearing, asking for mediation, or requesting IEP facilitation from the state to help reach a resolution. So next question is, does the school have to give me a copy of my child's IEP? Yes, the school must provide you a copy of your child's IEP. If a parent's native language is Spanish, the school must provide a written copy or audio recording of the IEP translated into Spanish. If a parent's native language is a language other than Spanish, the school must make a good faith effort to provide a written copy or an audio recording of the IEP in the parent's native language. All right, so we often get specific questions about dyslexia because, as we mentioned earlier, the State Board of Education's Dyslexia Handbook has specific requirements around dyslexia evaluation, identification, and instruction. So first question then is, why is there a separate dyslexia handbook when there isn't one for other disabilities? So even though dyslexia is a specific learning disability recognized by IDEA, there are some specific state laws around screening and evaluating students for dyslexia. There are also specific state law requirements around how to best provide dyslexia instruction to identified students. So complying with those laws is the responsibility of the State Board of Education. So in turn, they created and periodically amend their state rule at Title 19, Section 74.28 of the Texas Administrative Code. That's where rules are housed. So adopted within that rule is the State Board's Dyslexia Handbook, which outlines specific requirements for schools to follow. So every school must follow the handbook and the rule requirements, along with the federal requirements around special education, evaluation, and identification. So next question is, what does it mean to screen a child for dyslexia in kindergarten and grade 1? So screening in this case means that it's what's called universal screening. So every student in kindergarten and grade 1 is screened for dyslexia using specific tools or instruments that help teachers recognize if a student might be at risk of dyslexia or other reading difficulties. If a student is determined at risk, then certain interventions could be provided and more data would be gathered by the student's teachers to determine the next steps. And the next question is, a dyslexia evaluation separate and apart from a specific learning disability evaluation? No, a dyslexia evaluation is not separate and apart from a specific learning disability evaluation. The handbook does list specific evaluation domains and questions that must be considered when determining the presence of dyslexia, but this process occurs simultaneously with the evaluation team's comprehensive evaluation. So the presence of dyslexia is based on a preponderance of evidence, which will include multiple sources of data. Note that even as a parent, if you ask the school for a dyslexia evaluation for your child, the school must respond in the same way as any other special education evaluation. There is no separate dyslexia-only evaluation. Next question is dyslexia a specific learning disability that qualifies for special education services? So if dyslexia is identified and an ARD committee determines that the student needs dyslexia instruction, which is considered specially designed instruction or SDI, then yes, the identification of dyslexia qualifies for special education services. Most schools work within a long-established list of what are called areas of difficulty for a student with a specific learning disability, which includes things like basic reading skills, reading comprehension, reading fluency, and others. However, dyslexia itself is a specific learning disability that doesn't have to fit specifically within those areas. So let's move on to the last question before I show you some resources for you to review if you would like. So my child was receiving dyslexia instruction through a Section 504 plan. Why did the school say that my child now needs a special education evaluation? So state law passed out of the 88th Texas legislative session in 2023 clarified that the provision of direct dyslexia instruction is considered SDI, or that specially designed instruction we talked about as being part of special education. Therefore, if a student needs this instruction, then the requirements around special education evaluation, identification, and instruction do apply to that student. So before we wrap up, I wanted to provide some links to some resources that you might want to review if you would like to find out more information. So 2 documents in particular, the Parent's Guide to the ARD Process and the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, will definitely be useful in understanding the special education process and your rights as a parent. Note that these are currently being updated, though, because we have had quite a few commissioner rule changes in recent months. So the overview of special education for parents form that we discussed earlier is also useful, and just to get a simpler understanding of the special education process. And then finally, I've given you some links to relevant education code provisions as well as Texas Administrative Code provisions. So both commissioner rules and the State Board of Education rules are located in that Texas Administrative Code. And then the Education Code, of course, is what our state legislature has authority to amend during their legislative sessions. I also provided our agency dyslexia webpage, which has a copy of the handbook and the handbook FAQ. All right, and then lastly, to respond to stakeholder requests to research the topic, TEA has partnered with the American Institutes for Research to conduct a landscape analysis of states that have either developed or adopted a statewide IEP system for their public school systems to use. So part of that analysis also includes gathering input from educators, families, and other interested stakeholders to gauge interest in this type of state-developed or adopted individualized education program, or IEP, digital platform. So states research this, of course, whether to adopt something like this for a variety of reasons, including whether it would result in cost savings to the state and to local school systems, along with whether it would result in a more efficient special education system. So right now, the vast majority of districts pay a private vendor to administer an IEP digital platform for the district, while TEA has the responsibility to monitor district compliance with IEP requirements. Multiple IEP digital platforms in use throughout the state can pose challenges to this process. Additionally, this is sometimes difficult with the high mobility rate of Texas students, as families notice that their child's IEP looks different from one district to the next. So I did want to provide you this survey. It also is listed on the SpedTex homepage if you go to the SpedTex website. So a link and the QR code is provided for you on this slide should you wish to participate. Again, this is just a survey to gauge the sentiment around the potential for the state to engage in that type of process. So definitely would appreciate your feedback. And again, that is on the SpedTex website. So again, I thank you for having us today, having TEA present to you today, and please continue to visit spedtex.org with questions and to find resources. And I will turn it back over, I think, to Sarah, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you to everyone for being here. We are going to go back to Stephanie McLaughlin to share some additional information about Partners Resource Network.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Kristen, for this update. On the screen is our contact information. Please be sure and check out our website at prntexas.org. On our website, you can find out about events going on in your local area, as well as our statewide webinars that are going on, and like and follow us on social media.
Have questions about special education? Contact us at SpedTex, your source for special education information. We are happy to help. Our contact information is on the screen. We are going to stop recording now